Hello, and welcome to a new edition of Need to Know, a series of video interviews with companies who are shaping, creating, and innovating in the games industry today, and whose work will have a huge impact going forward into the future. Today, I'm delighted to welcome Dominic Dugan, Group Creative Director at Oktra. Hi, Dom. How are you doing today?
Very well, Leo. Thank you for
Good
having
stuff.
me.
No problem at all. Well, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining me here today in this conversation. I'll get you to introduce yourself in just a moment, but for our viewers' benefit, we're going to be talking about neurodiversity today and creating confidence in the workplace. So, Dom, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and who Oktra is?
Sure. So I'll talk about Oktra first, and then I think if I come afterwards, it will make sense about how we're leading, if you like, to this topic and how it's quite important to me. So Oktra, in short, are a 25-year-old business. We are based in London, but we, in essence, are regional. We cover the whole of the UK. We are a design and build company in that we create, we design, and we deliver as a contractor of typically predominantly workspaces. And those workspaces that we deliver, if you like, offices, as some people refer to them as, go anything from being fully furnished to also then actually working on the building itself in terms of improving the building, ready for workplaces to then occupy, if you like. Mm-hmm. We are structured so much so that we've got a lot of creative people sitting with delivery people, sitting with commercial people, and together we holistically are fully accountable for projects. And I myself joined 8 years ago, and as a senior designer, I then became a team leader. I'm now the creative director. And what that sort of basically means is that I sort of come from a background of doing projects, doing projects in terms of, actually being so-called the lead designer on the projects. And before that, my experience, if you like, or my experience goes back, I think it's 24 years this year, where I started out designing things like schools, leisure centres, and public exhibitions. I actually worked for Hampshire County Council architects before then, and we were working on new builds with architects coming out of the ground and what have you. And then I moved to a company called BDP, and basically what was really fascinating about that was I sort of took my education experience into a business that did education, but also healthcare, transport, workplace, retail, but ultimately retail and all of these environments that were about big numbers of people. I'm talking schools for over 2,000. I'm talking shopping centres for thousands of people, and brands obviously with that. And I focused 14 years ago on workplace because I felt like it affects, though workplaces do affect many people, and we all need to sustain, if you like, a way of living, and work is one of those things, and call it a job or career, however you want to call it. And a lot of people in my position will refer to clients as being the people in the project team and clients that are decision makers. But ultimately, clients for me are every user. Okay, let's just get that really, really clear. And workspaces, you see on Instagram, they're photographed really well. They look beautiful. They can look really engaging on first impressions. And I think that's what we all want. But ultimately, we want them to work. And that's dear to me in terms of what does success look like. I've experienced failure in many respects. Maybe that's partly to do with me, but also to do with maybe how the project team was assembled or the way the project was guided or procured. And or maybe just the way the project wasn't started well from a sort of brief development stage. So I'm work for Oktra, and I'm not the boss, but I'm in a position as a creative director to hopefully influence as many projects as possible so they start well and they work and they perform. And that's a sort of basic introduction about me, and I'm looking forward to talking about what performance actually looks like, particularly in relation to neurodiversity.
Absolutely. Okay. That's a fascinating background. Thank you so much. So we were gonna start with understanding sort of how you inspire confidence in the workplace with regard to design. Yeah, that would be really interesting to talk about.
Okay, so let's. I think a lot of people think of interior designers as creating fabulous looking environments. I know I've already touched on this, and they do create fabulous looking environments. The point is that the images are almost Instagrammable, and that's really important. It's important from a let's say from an attraction perspective. If a business wants to attract, and looking one thing is one thing, working another way is another thing, and lots of businesses are now pushing their environments to its limit, which is great. They're pushing it to the point of really questioning what the purpose of an office is. Now, especially, we've now gone through a time where a lot of people have the choice to work from home. And in some instances, it's been proven to be really successful to work from home. And we don't really know the long-term effects of it, and I'm happy to confirm that, because I'm definitely one that stands by that. In terms of the effects of career progression, we can do project stuff now and we're productive, but over the years, and we're sort of 2.5 years, 3 years in now, out of the back end of this thing, where we're starting to see or understand career progression of individuals, and then almost like the effects of working from home. Let's just call it not being around people as much physically, call it in person. So, but all of that leads to what's the purpose of an office. But that's your question. I really want to sort of look at performance. I really want to look at actually what is the thing that really kind of supports, and what is the thing that actually enables people to feel confident. So I'm talking about it not just from a social thing, which I think a lot of people see the purpose of the office nowadays, but actually I'm going to talk about it from a productivity perspective, in that there's lots of things we can draw from the home, such as comfort, such as concentration, acoustics, whether it's to do with lighting, whether it's to do with fresh air, or not being watched, and you can go outside and go for that ad hoc stroll if you've got time between meetings. And there's all of those moments and those little clues that we can bring into a professional environment to help furnish that solution, which I think is about bringing confidence. Okay, and I want to talk about it in the sense of, particularly with a particular community, such as people who are neurodiverse, and that's a whole spectrum of requirements and what have you. But I do believe that we can start to go there and start to improve the office so that it becomes a more comfortable environment for people to sort of basically work in. And there's a whole host of like things to focus on in terms of needs, because whether it's anything, I was talking to someone this morning about the most simple thing being about a whiteboard, right? But people didn't have them, or they didn't feel confident enough to stand up and use the whiteboard in an environment where they were sort of looked upon. And people didn't perform their best work when they're at work, but when they went home, they were working like twice as many hours just to get their best work done in their own space. I mean, how weird is that? And that's to do with the physical environment. And that's the stuff I do, which I do think we can sort of make a difference in. So back to my point about clients, the users for me are the most important people, not the people who write the checks.
Definitely. So, I mean, how would you go about sort of, how would you sort of begin considering what would be important in these environments to sort of focus on? You touched upon a couple of elements there, but yeah, are there any in particular?
Well, it depends on the organisation, obviously, and we work. When I say workplaces, we work with many different types of businesses. Let's say, I mean, I'm talking from corporates or banks or large scale down to small creative firms or what have you, and you take your industry for example. There's a particular requirement we've come across with gaming as an example, where we've had some fascinating briefs, let's say, coming in the last sort of 2 or 3 years, where people want to sort of acknowledge the neurodiverse community and actually sort of understand what it is that people need. And there's no sort of like, there's no like requirement kit, you know, that you just have to sort of plug in. And I think that's where people get design wrong, in that it's a bit like sustainability or accessibility, and we just need to think holistically. And what I mean by that, and well, I really would like to shift this question on a bit to actually say, how do we find out what those things are? And so when we get access to the users, I mean, the people who, I mean, as I quite passionately sort of mentioned earlier, that, you know, when we get access to the right people, we can ask the right questions. And there's a process that we've got in place that gets people together out of their environment, out of their work environment, out of their home environment. Maybe they come here, maybe we meet in a neutral place, wherever there's one-to-ones that happen, whether there's questionnaires that happen, whether there's visits to other work that we've done with these groups, whether they're champions, whatever businesses want to call it, okay? But it's about really bringing the design team on board so that we can effectively validate that what we're doing is right for you. And most businesses have a very similar list of requirements, but they're just proportionately different. Okay, so whether it's anything from a phone booth, which I know we don't want to hear on a call like today, but they are helpful. Question is, do they need to be bookable, or is it more of an ad hoc need? And the balance of that requirement is shaped by this discovery process. However, then once you've got your requirements, or what your sort of through your discovery process, what effectively those needs are, from understanding the culture of the business, then you naturally, as a designer, should then acknowledge not just the neurodiverse sort of needs, let's say, as in the range of environments to provide such comfort. You've got to ensure that there's the control around those comforts, such as temperature, such as light, such as bringing the right levels of privacy. There needs to be the investment in the acoustics. It all needs to be really accessible, not just because, oh, you've got it on a level floor on the ground floor, that's okay, and we don't need to accommodate it in the basement. That's absolute nonsense. And therefore, when it comes to actually applying this and building this thing, that you're responsible, you know, you're sourcing materials responsibly. And yes, the building might have a BREEAM or you know, whatever it is, sort of accreditation that needs to be sort of acknowledged, and that's fantastic. But we should just be doing these things naturally as way of second nature. So this brolly of responsibility is where the designer brings what I call best practice to the table, but really the knowledge of the user's needs is the thing that needs to come into it. And we've done some amazing things where, if I were to not talk about design for a minute and talk about businesses that actually want to promote movement in their offices, because they're quite big bits of real estate that they're taking, but people are just like nesting in certain corners because they've got their little tea point or something, and they've got their group that everyone's sort of happy with, so they don't mix up. And we want people to sort of, businesses are a little, or businesses are like communities, and they've got to sort of, they haven't got to get along, but the best ones do get along. So let's then use every sort of inch of this real estate as much as we can by making people move. And so movement's just one thing. You know, we've talked about, for example, areas to focus, and people would say, give them a room. That's like the worst thing, because I feel uncomfortable that I'm taking up a whole room myself individually. But what if there were some rules around an environment, such as turn your phone off and actually hide in the little corner? But the reward is actually, you won't be disturbed. And the reward is just, there's a discipline around those sorts of things. There's lots of factors, whether it's movements, whether it's that, whether it's control of your environment because of natural light. They're real kind of clues and needs that come out of these kind of processes, so that we can help design the best environments for those needs.
Sounds like quite an in-depth consultation process, and lots of things to sort of consider.
It is in depth, but it's fun. Really, we do try to sort of make it fun. There's the science behind it. There's a lot of observation and data work that we sort of put into it, but we need to bring the confidence of that user. And before I forget, sorry if I'm talking, and please do interrupt me, Leo, but too much. But what I would say is this process is all about engagement. And engagement is two things. There's one about confidence to sort of open up, speak up, etc., let people in. But there's the data which then drives that. But none of this matters. None of it matters whatsoever unless further on down the line, once this thing's created or just about being formed, that there's an educational piece. So whether it's you're a business and you've worked with Oktra and it works really well, but 6 months down the line, you're employing more people, you've got some great growth happening, but no one knows how to use the office because they don't understand the purpose which it was designed for. I mean, it doesn't need an instruction manual, but it does need an introduction. At least that way, then it goes a little step further to being successful, which I think is really important. And I call that courtesy. So that when you do join a business, you understand everyone else's contribution to that design solution.
No, that makes sense. That makes sense. A bit of orientation and giving a bit more, detail around how the office should be used and how it's designed to be used. Fantastic. Okay, brilliant stuff. Do you have any sort of specific examples of spaces that you've designed in mind with relation to the games industry?
Yeah, I've got to say I can't speak for whether I can disclose names as such because I'm not close. But yeah, I mean, what is particularly fascinating about, I would say, my experience with, as in Oktra's experience, but my particular experience with those sorts of with those businesses, is scale. They've taken environments that are of a scale. I'm talking, if it means anything to anyone, I'm talking 20, 30,000 square feet. I'm talking big spaces that I'm not sure whether they are from a landlord developer type sort of environment, whether they are, there's a lot of glass, there's a lot of views, and they're in a great part of town, and location is probably, I would say, the driver for the decision there more than the actual envelope itself. But we can work with them, but it does bring more of a sort of challenge, if you like. Now, the benefits of big spaces are they can generate more background noise, which can be a positive thing, as opposed to a small office where you can sort of like hear a pin drop. So that's always beneficial. But I do think that with big workplaces, variety does need to sort of come into mind a bit. And I find that really amazing in that the way that you can create a really interesting landscape, and you use that brief discovery process to actually integrate effectively that variety. I mean, as an example, using let's say where there's typically sort of an entrance to a floor plate where people arrive when they come out the lift, that's typically a busy area, okay? So we really want a level of interaction around those zones. Likewise, the patterns of just going to the toilet. And so people will get up, there's a route, people will instinctively or intuitively be able to, they're not going to have a manual how to get there, they're going to learn how to use the office, and there's going to be a behavior. And it's those behaviors that I think we need to learn from in previous projects to know how to design better. So that, for instance, the negative space or the space left over, which are out of those kind of areas, are great places to maybe focus, or great places for bigger numbers of people to come together so that they don't then distract the areas of focus. So you're creating these kind of like distances. And maybe I spoke about this when we were talking about movement a minute ago, but they're the sort of examples that, and if we were to flip this just for a second and talk about it from almost like an insurance type sort of client, let's say, there's not that variety. There doesn't seem to be as much of a sensitivity from an attraction and retention sort of need. And I think that's got something to do with maybe the front of house being more of a dynamic space for people to come in because of the maybe the ambivert or extrovert sort of nature of some of those individuals that we maybe we're assuming, but I can tell you now from some of the studies that we've done of that sort of sector versus the gaming, they're definitely two very different sort of levels by comparison, and that does shape the front entrance. That does shape the behaviour of the office, and it does shape the choice or variety of workplace settings in the office as well. One other thing while I think about it is environment comfort, such as we talk about lighting and stuff like that. You know what I mean by that. I don't think that there's one lighting solution in these base builds that's great for everyone. I'm talking about an environment that really captures the needs, so that, for example, in the morning it's one sort of temperature, and in the afternoon, evening, it's another temperature, so that you don't just have, if you like, this consistency all the way through, because I think it would like limit sort of focus, basically, in all honesty. So I think that you know we need to think about that as well, in terms of not just the design solutions, in terms of like how we furnish something, how we proportionate space, but how we support the base build lighting and the natural light in that space to support those needs. So that has a lot to do with how we sort of place people.
It's very fascinating, Dom. Well, thank you so much. There's lots to consider, really, isn't there? And I must admit, I've visited your basement, and it's very nice down there. So you know what you're talking about. Well, thank you so much, Dom, for talking to us today. I really appreciate it. Right. Very insightful and lots.
Good. I hope I didn't talk too much.
No. I'm sure. We'll squeeze it all in. And thank you as well today for our audience who have tuned in to catch this video. There's plenty of other need to know videos out there on our Ukie TV channel on YouTube. And thank you for tuning into this one, enjoying this one, and more soon. Thank you so much.